Hi guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the life of one of the most mysterious figures of the 18th century, a master of disguise, a diplomat, a spy, and a person who lived across two identities with a grace that still fascinates historians. This is the story of Chevalier d'Eon, someone who moved between worlds, between genders, and between the shadows of espionage and the bright halls of royal courts. In the next moments, we'll drift calmly into the early years of a life shaped by secrecy, intelligence, and a quiet kind of courage. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe, and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. Born in 1728 in the small French town of Tonnerre, Charles Geneviève Louis Auguste André Timothée d'Eon de Beaumont arrived in a world that was rigid, orderly, and deeply defined by expectations. Even as a child, there was something unusually observant about d'Eon, a softness in demeanour paired with a sharpness of mind that allowed an almost effortless blend into any environment. The family belonged to the minor nobility, comfortable enough to provide education and opportunity, yet distant enough from the great centres of power that ambition had room to grow. d'Eon's father, Louis d'Eon, served as an administrator, a disciplined, methodical man who valued service above spectacle. His mother, Françoise de Charenton, was thoughtful and introspective, nurturing an atmosphere in the household that encouraged reading, curiosity, and careful attention to the world. From these two influences, d'Eon developed a balance of restraint and imagination. As a teenager, d'Eon excelled academically, particularly in law and political theory. There was an ease in navigating complex ideas, a way of reading human behaviour that hinted at something deeper, a talent that, in time, would catch the attention of people far beyond Tonnerre. Those who met d'Eon often spoke of an unusual presence, calm, composed, quietly intelligent, and capable of shifting between gentleness and authority depending on the moment. Friends would later remark that d'Eon could enter a room and instantly understand the social temperature, adjusting behaviour almost instinctively. It wasn't performance, it was survival, a natural inclination toward adapting, blending, and watching. Though the outer world saw nothing extraordinary yet, a quiet duality was already forming in d'Eon's life, a sense of existing in a flexible space where identity wasn't fixed, but fluid. At 17, armed with a strong education and a deep desire to understand society structures, d'Eon left home for Paris. The city brought both stimulation and solitude, grand libraries, glittering salons, and beneath it all a steady undercurrent of political tension. d'Eon studied law at the Collège Mazarin, where discipline, nuance and precision shaped the young scholar's path. Professors noted an exceptional ability to absorb detail, to interpret legal texts with both logic and intuition. Yet even in this environment, d'Eon's adaptability remained the most striking trait. In the capital's social circles, d'Eon could be charming without being imposing, witty without drawing too much attention, and quietly confident in a way that allowed access to conversations usually reserved for people of higher status. It was this rare combination, intelligence, subtlety, and social agility, that would soon open the door to something far more dangerous than academics. By the early 1750s, whispers of political opportunity drifted through Paris, an invitation to join King Louis XV's secret network, a shadow organisation operating beneath official diplomacy. And while d'Eon did not yet know the full shape of the life ahead, the path toward espionage had already begun to unfold, softly, silently, as if guided by an invisible hand leading toward destiny. In Paris, the world around d'Eon shifted from the steady pace of study to the subtle movements of politics, where conversations carried double meanings and every gesture hinted at something unspoken. What began as simple curiosity about diplomatic service soon became a quiet fascination with the structures of power, how nations communicated, how agreements were shaped, and how a single well-placed word could alter an entire negotiation. Dion's reputation as a gifted thinker slowly reached the edges of official diplomatic circles, but it was a more discreet organisation that noticed first. King Louis XIII maintained a secret intelligence service separate from the formal ministry, a hidden network known as the Secret du Roi. This group operated entirely outside public knowledge, carrying out delicate missions that required subtlety, composure, and absolute loyalty. Dion's blend of discipline, charm, and intellect made an impression on those scouting for potential recruits. Their interest was quiet, almost invisible, arriving in the form of private conversations and subtle invitations to gatherings where only a certain kind of person was noticed. Though still young, Dion carried a presence that suggested neither arrogance nor hesitation, just a calm way of observing the world, absorbing details without revealing personal thoughts. It was precisely the temperament that intelligence work needed. By the mid-1750s, the road ahead began to curve away from ordinary public service. Dion's legal writing caught the attention of influential figures who admired the precision and restraint woven into each sentence. That quality of clarity, paired with an ability to keep emotions hidden beneath a steady surface, made Dion someone superiors trusted instinctively. Slowly, invitations arrived to attend small diplomatic gatherings where experienced envoys spoke in coded language, discussing foreign courts with both caution and curiosity. Dion listened, learned, and asked thoughtful questions when appropriate, always careful to reveal interest without ambition. At one such meeting, a senior official remarked privately that Dion possessed a mind suited to shadows, but a personality welcome in daylight, a comment that would echo throughout later years. As trust formed, Dion was introduced to contacts connected to the King's Secret Service, individuals skilled at moving between formal diplomacy and covert assignments. They observed how easily Dion adapted to shifting social environments, speaking comfortably with scholars one day, and nobles the next. They noticed the calm steadiness when faced with unpredictable conversations, the ability to remain composed even when topics grew delicate. Eventually, the discreet suggestion arrived, a request to consider serving the king in a capacity that required more than scholarship. It required secrecy, alertness, and the flexibility to move through different identities if needed. Dion understood the gravity of such an offer, yet felt no fear, only a quiet readiness, as though life had been gently preparing for this moment all along. Accepting meant stepping into a world where truth and performance often blurred, where loyalty demanded silence and adaptation became a form of survival. Without announcing anything publicly, without altering the calm routine of daily life, Dion took the first step into the hidden world of espionage, not yet aware of how profoundly this path would shape the dual existence that history would remember forever. Dion's entry into the Secret du Roi unfolded quietly, with no ceremony, no official appointment, and no trace left in public records. It began with small assignments meant to test reliability, carrying sealed letters between discreet residences in Paris, gathering information from visiting diplomats under the guise of polite conversation, and observing how individuals of influence moved through social spaces. These tasks were simple on the surface, yet they revealed a deeper aptitude in Dion, an instinct for sensing tension, recognizing hidden intentions, and adjusting behavior with remarkable subtlety. Those early missions built a foundation of trust, and soon Dion was introduced to the inner workings of the king's secret agenda. Louis XV used this covert network to pursue goals his government did not always share, often sending agents to negotiate in foreign courts, gather intelligence on alliances, or quietly shape public opinion in favour of French interests. Working for this private service meant navigating a delicate balance between official structures and secret orders. It required discretion even among colleagues, for the Secret du Roi operated in layers, with each agent knowing only the portion of the mission essential to their role. Dion adapted naturally to this environment, finding comfort in the rhythm of hidden tasks and silent observation. What set Dion apart was not only intelligence, but also a calm ability to blend into any setting. In formal gatherings, Dion could speak clearly and confidently, presenting thoughtful arguments without drawing unnecessary attention. In private settings, Dion listened more than spoke, gathering small pieces of information that later formed a complete picture of political intentions. This balance of presence and restraint made a strong impression on superiors. By 1756, as tensions rose across Europe and the 7 Years' War began reshaping international alliances, France needed skilled operatives capable of working behind the scenes. Trusted with increasingly delicate tasks, Dion was assigned to assist in diplomatic missions connected to Russia, a nation whose shifting loyalties could alter the balance of power. Preparing for this assignment required studying Russian customs, political structures, and the personalities of key figures at court. Dion approached the task with quiet dedication, spending long hours reading reports, memorizing names, and learning the subtle differences in etiquette that shaped life in St. Petersburg. The more Dion learned, the clearer it became that this would not be an ordinary diplomatic mission. It required sensitivity, adaptability, and a willingness to move between identities as circumstances demanded, qualities that had already begun to define Dion's path long before any disguise would be worn. The journey toward Russia began with a quiet sense of anticipation, a calm awareness that the next chapter of Dion's life would unfold far from the familiar streets of Paris. Before departure, Dion spent several weeks assisting French diplomats who had previously served in St. Petersburg, absorbing every detail they offered: descriptions of court rituals, the temperament of Empress Elizabeth, and the subtle power struggles woven through the Russian aristocracy. These conversations painted a picture of a world both glittering and volatile, where alliances shifted quickly, and small mistakes could carry heavy consequences. Unlike France, where tradition shaped much of daily life, Russia was a land where abrupt changes in leadership could transform the entire social atmosphere overnight. To succeed there, an agent needed to be adaptable, observant, and endlessly patient, qualities that came naturally to Dion. Preparing for the mission also meant understanding the unique expectations surrounding foreign envoys. Russia welcomed talented European visitors, yet watched them closely, testing their loyalty and intentions. Dion was briefed on how to navigate these dynamics: speak with confidence but avoid unnecessary boldness, show respect for Russian customs without appearing insincere, and maintain composure even when conversations took unexpected turns. As departure drew nearer, Dion felt a quiet shift within, a mixture of curiosity and calm determination. Travel in the mid-18th century was slow and unpredictable, but Dion embraced the journey as part of the mission itself. Each mile offered time to reflect, to imagine the landscapes and people ahead, and to settle into the stillness needed for a long diplomatic assignment. The route to Russia crossed through territories marked by cold winds, dense forests, and fragile roads that tested both patience and endurance. For many travellers, the discomfort would have overshadowed everything else. But for Dion, the journey became an opportunity to observe different cultures, note differences in language and dress, and practice the skill of blending in even when far from home. By the time St. Petersburg's grand palaces finally appeared in the distance, shimmering faintly beneath the winter sky, Dion had adopted a steady, focused mindset. The city felt both imposing and inviting, a place where elegance coexisted with constant tension. Here, diplomacy was not just a profession, but a performance, requiring grace, tact, and the ability to read unspoken messages in every gesture. Stepping into this environment, Dion remained poised and quietly attentive, ready to serve the king's secret agenda while navigating the complexities of a foreign empire. Though unaware of how deeply Russia would shape the years ahead, Dion sensed that this mission would test every skill learned so far and reveal new aspects of identity that had long remained unspoken beneath the surface. Life in St. Petersburg introduced Dion to a world where diplomacy unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. The Russian court was magnificent but unpredictable, filled with dazzling halls, elaborate ceremonies, and a constant flow of whispers behind embroidered fans. Empress Elizabeth valued elegance and spectacle, and her court reflected her tastes. bright colours, elaborate gowns, and strict etiquette guiding every movement. For a newcomer, this environment could overwhelm the senses, yet Dion moved through it with calm observation. Early days were spent accompanying experienced French envoys to official gatherings, learning how Russian nobles communicated through subtle cues: a raised eyebrow, a slow glance, a slight tilt of the head. Conversations were rarely direct. Instead, they circled important matters with graceful metaphors and gentle flattery. Dion quickly understood that listening carried as much weight as speaking. It was during these quiet observations that Dion began noticing the delicate struggle for influence among foreign ambassadors. The British, Prussians, Austrians, and French all competed for the Empress's favour, each seeking to shape Russia's future alliances. France hoped to strengthen ties and gain support in the larger conflict unfolding across Europe. Dion's task was not only to assist in official negotiations, but also to gather subtle information: which noble favoured which alliance, who whispered too eagerly to foreign diplomats, and which advisers held the Empress's ear at crucial moments. This work required patience and a careful ability to blend into conversations without alarming anyone. Dion found unexpected ease in this role, often becoming the quiet presence people forgot to guard themselves around. Trust came slowly, built through respectful conduct, measured words, and a gentle manner that made others feel comfortable sharing more than they intended. Another layer of the mission involved maintaining communication with the secret du roi. Messages had to be sent discreetly, sometimes hidden within diplomatic reports, other times carried by carefully chosen messengers. This double responsibility, serving both the official embassy and the king's private network, required constant awareness. A single misplaced word could expose the entire operation. Yet amid the demands of diplomacy, Dion also found a certain rhythm in the city itself. St. Petersburg's winters, though harsh, brought a quiet beauty. Snow softened the edges of the streets, and the frozen Neva River reflected lanterns like scattered stars. Evening rides through the city became moments of reflection, allowing thoughts to settle and clarity to return after long days of political tension. What few around Dion realized was that beneath the poised exterior, deeper questions of identity were quietly forming. In the elegant world of the Russian court, where clothing, presentation, and social roles were strictly defined, Dion began sensing a pull toward a different expression of self, something softer and more fluid than the expectations placed upon a male diplomat. Though these thoughts remained unspoken, they lingered gently, shaping the inner landscape that would one day become central to Dion's life. For now, the mission continued, and each passing day revealed new layers of both the political world and the private world quietly unfolding within. As the months in St. Petersburg unfolded, Dion's responsibilities deepened in ways both expected and quietly transformative. The French embassy relied increasingly on Dion's ability to interpret the shifting moods of the court, for it soon became clear that diplomacy in Russia was not governed solely by written agreements, but by emotions, personalities, and the subtle rhythm of favour. Success often depended on anticipating changes before they happened, and Dion possessed a remarkable intuition for sensing when political winds were about to shift. Conversations with courtiers revealed more through tone than content. A softened voice might signal doubt. An overly cheerful greeting could mask unease. Dion learned to read these details as if they were part of a private language, one spoken not aloud but through atmosphere. This sensitivity made Dion a valuable intermediary, someone who could approach delicate matters gently, without triggering unnecessary conflict. It was during this period that Dion developed a respectful rapport with Empress Elizabeth herself. Although never part of her innermost circle, Dion was occasionally invited to events where the Empress appeared in all her theatrical brilliance: glittering gowns, elaborate hairstyles, and an almost regal playfulness. She valued dignity, beauty, and loyalty, and she responded well to sincerity. Dion's calm, attentive demeanour left a quiet impression, opening doors to opportunities no written instructions could have predicted. One such opportunity emerged when a complex negotiation arose between France and Russia involving military coordination. Higher-ranking diplomats debated strategy, but it was Dion who noticed a minor yet pivotal detail, a particular advisor's hesitation whenever a certain proposal was mentioned. Quietly, without drawing attention, Dion engaged the advisor in conversation later, listening carefully to his concerns about long-term commitments. This allowed the French delegation to adjust their approach, presenting a version of the plan that eased the advisor's fears. The negotiation ultimately succeeded, though few realised how crucial that single moment of observation had been. While political work occupied most days, the layered nature of Dion's identity continued to evolve in private. St. Petersburg's court expected impeccable presentation, and for diplomatic occasions attire was often elaborate. Wearing ornate clothing, moving through spaces where elegance was not just appreciated but required, Dion felt something shift internally, a sense of comfort in forms of expression others might have considered unconventional. Yet these reflections remained deeply personal, held close like a quiet secret. In a world where roles were rigid and judgment swift, there was no space to explore these thoughts openly. Still the feelings grew, gentle and persistent. Outside the palace walls, the city itself became a quiet refuge. Evening walks along snow-covered streets offered a sense of stillness rarely found in diplomatic halls. The cold air cleared the mind, and the soft glow of lanterns along the Neva created moments of rare tranquility. It was during these solitary walks that Dion found time to breathe, to sort through the complexities of political duties and the silent questions about identity that surfaced more often now. Yet even as these inner reflections deepened, the mission moved steadily forward. New tasks awaited, new alliances needed tending, and new messages from France arrived with increasing urgency. The work grew heavier, but so did the sense that St. Petersburg was shaping Dion in lasting ways, not only as a diplomat and spy, but as a person quietly discovering the fluid boundaries of selfhood in a world that saw only absolutes. The longer Dion remained in St. Petersburg, the more intricate the web of responsibilities became. France relied on every whisper of information, and the Secret du Roi pressed for updates that could not appear in official documents. Balancing these two channels required a calm mind and a steady awareness of who was watching at any given moment. Dion learned to write letters in layers, the surface containing polite diplomatic reports, while the deepest meanings hid behind carefully chosen phrases recognisable only to those within the king's private network. Despite the constant pressure, there was something quietly satisfying about this dual role. It allowed Dion to operate not as a single figure trapped in one identity, but as someone who could shift gracefully between worlds, adjusting voice, posture, or intention depending on the moment. This fluidity, once simply a survival instinct, was becoming an integral part of how Dion understood the self. Yet the work was far from simple. Russia's political landscape shifted rapidly as tensions rose within the court. Rumours whispered through the palace hinted at changes in alliances, changes in leadership, and even changes in how foreign envoys were viewed. Each week seemed to bring a new challenge, and Dion adapted with quiet resilience, listening more than speaking, and always taking great care to avoid the missteps that less observant diplomats often made. A particularly delicate moment arrived during a formal winter gathering at the palace. The grand hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers, and the guests wore heavy gowns embroidered with gold thread. As music drifted through the room, Dion noticed a sudden unease among several nobles, a subtle tightening of shoulders, quiet glances exchanged in corners. Something had shifted in the Empress's mood, though no announcement had been made. Trusting instinct, Dion approached the French ambassador and quietly advised delaying a planned discussion about military coordination. Hours later, the decision proved wise. An unexpected dispute had erupted among Russian advisors, and approaching sensitive topics would have risked damaging months of diplomatic progress. These moments strengthened Dion's reputation as someone who not only understood politics, but sensed the emotional atmosphere that shaped decisions. And yet, in private, the quiet exploration of identity continued. Dressing for formal events often brought a surprising sense of comfort. The layers of fabric, the graceful movements required by etiquette, and the freedom found within carefully curated presentation stirred emotions that Dion could not easily name. It was as though the strict categories society insisted upon felt too narrow for the inner world slowly unfolding. Still, there was no space to reveal these thoughts. The Russian court, despite its beauty, offered little tolerance for deviation from established norms. And so, the reflections remained silent, carried gently beneath the demands of espionage and diplomacy. Through it all, Dion continued moving between roles with the same quiet precision as ever, unaware that these early stirrings of identity would one day place them at the centre of one of history's most extraordinary personal transformations. As winter deepened in St. Petersburg, the rhythm of diplomatic life settled into a steady yet demanding pace. Messages from France arrived with increasing urgency, each one reminding Dion of the delicate balance between official duties and secret assignments. The French crown relied heavily on subtle intelligence, and the secret du roi needed eyes and ears within the Russian court who could move unnoticed. Dion's calm demeanour and ability to blend into any environment made this work possible, though it required constant attention. Every conversation had to be measured, every gesture carefully chosen, and every report crafted with precision to avoid drawing unwanted suspicion. During this period, Dion formed a quiet working friendship with a small circle of Russian officials known for their fairness and loyalty. They appreciated Dion's respectful manner and steady presence, and although the friendship remained within diplomatic boundaries, it offered rare moments of ease in an otherwise tense world. These allies often provided stories of court life or insights into political moods that helped France navigate its strategy more effectively. One of these officials, a thoughtful nobleman known for his calm wisdom, often discussed topics far beyond politics: art, literature, philosophy, and the complexities of human nature. Their conversations, held in quiet corners of the palace, or during slow evening walks through the snow-covered gardens, helped shape Dion's understanding of the subtle emotions and motivations that guided the decisions of those in power. Yet even in these peaceful exchanges, Dion never forgot the need for caution. Trust was a rare commodity in a court where alliances shifted almost daily. A kind word today could turn into suspicion tomorrow if interpreted incorrectly. Still, these moments of connection provided something valuable, a reminder that diplomacy was not only about strategy, but about understanding people at their most human level. Meanwhile, life in the city offered small comforts. Dion found solace in walking along the frozen Neva, where the stillness of winter created a sense of calm that diplomatic halls rarely allowed. The soft glow of street lanterns reflected on the snow, and the muffled sound of sleighs passing by created a peaceful backdrop for reflection. These walks became a way to clear the mind and process both political tension and the quiet questions of identity that lingered beneath the surface. In public, Dion maintained the role expected of a skilled male diplomat, yet in private moments there was an undeniable pull towards softness, toward forms of expression that felt more natural and more authentic. The ornate fabrics, the refined etiquette, the graceful movement of life at court, all of it stirred something inside, something that felt truer than the rigid roles assigned by society. These feelings, though unspoken, grew stronger with time, weaving themselves into the fabric of daily life. Still, the mission remained the priority. France depended on accuracy, discretion, and emotional intelligence, qualities Dion possessed in abundance. And though the future held profound transformations yet to unfold, in these early years in Russia, identity remained a quiet, private landscape, waiting for the moment when it would finally be allowed to step into the light. With spring approaching, a subtle shift touched the Russian court. Light returned to St. Petersburg in longer, gentler hours, and with it came a renewed burst of political activity. As ambassadors prepared new proposals and foreign envoys arrived with fresh agendas, Dion found the workload intensifying. Every meeting seemed to carry added weight, and every conversation hinted at potential consequences for France's position in the broader European conflict. Yet amid the growing demands, Dion maintained a steady composure that colleagues increasingly relied on. There was a remarkable calmness in the way Dion processed information, weighing it carefully before offering an opinion. This ability was especially valuable during complex negotiations where emotions ran high. Often, when senior diplomats grew frustrated or impatient, Dion stepped in with thoughtful observations that eased tension and shifted discussions back toward cooperation. It was during one such negotiation that Dion's intuition proved critical. A minor disagreement between Russian advisors and the French delegation threatened to derail progress. Voices rose and frustration rippled through the room. Noticing an overlooked detail in the proposal documents, Dion quietly approached the table, pointed out the misunderstanding, and suggested a simple clarification. The atmosphere softened almost immediately, and within hours the argument resolved. The ambassador later thanked Dion privately, remarking that few possessed the combination of patience and insight needed to navigate such delicate moments. Outside diplomatic halls, life in St. Petersburg continued to shape Dion in personal ways. The city's mix of grandeur and vulnerability, frozen rivers, vast palaces, and the constant dance between power and uncertainty mirrored Dion's own inner experience. While navigating court life with the expected confidence of a male envoy, Dion increasingly felt drawn toward expressions of identity that did not align with traditional expectations. These thoughts came quietly, often during evenings spent preparing reports or during rare moments of solitude when the world felt still. Yet despite their persistence, they remained hidden. In the rigid environment of 18th century diplomacy, where reputation could be shattered by even minor deviations from social norms, there was no space for exploring unconventional identity. And so these reflections stayed beneath the surface, woven through daily experiences but never spoken aloud. Nevertheless, a sense of duality grew steadily, a gentle awareness that the outer role and the inner truth were beginning to diverge in ways that could not be ignored forever. For now, though, the mission demanded full attention. France continued to rely on Dion's adaptability, emotional insight, and unwavering discretion. And while the inner landscape deepened quietly, the outer world of diplomacy pressed forward, shaping Dion into one of the most capable and trusted figures in the king's secret network, unaware of the remarkable journey of identity and transformation that lay ahead. As political tensions across Europe intensified, the Secret du Roi expanded its network of discreet assignments, and Dion soon found these missions blending seamlessly into daily diplomatic duties. While the French embassy maintained its formal operations, the king's private network required something far more subtle: quiet observation, coded correspondence, and an ability to interpret fleeting moments that others overlooked. Dion carried out these tasks with calm precision, often working late into the night by candlelight, crafting letters whose true meaning was understood only by a handful of trusted figures in Paris. These late hours offered a rare sense of peace. When the palace corridors fell silent and the city outside softened into stillness, Dion felt a quiet clarity that made the complexities of court life easier to navigate. The dual role, diplomat by day, secret agent by necessity, might have overwhelmed someone less adaptable. But for Dion, moving between identities felt almost natural, as though each role revealed a different shade of the same self. Still, the challenges grew. Rumours of shifting alliances circulated constantly, and ambassadors from rival nations grew bolder in their attempts to sway Russian policy. The British delegation in particular pushed for influence with determined persistence. Dion watched these movements carefully, noting subtle gestures, overheard remarks, and the emotional currents flowing beneath official discussions. Observing people had become second nature, and it was often in these small, quiet details that the most valuable insights emerged. One evening, during an elegant gathering at the Winter Palace, Dion noticed a British envoy attempting to pressure a young Russian official into revealing confidential information. The conversation appeared harmless to most onlookers, but the tension in the young official's posture was unmistakable. Sensing the risk, Dion gently intervened, guiding the conversation towards safer topics without drawing suspicion. Later, the Russian official expressed quiet gratitude, unaware of how close he had come to compromising sensitive matters. Acts like these strengthened Dion's standing within the court, though the recognition remained understated. Diplomacy thrived on subtlety, and the greatest successes were often the least visible. Meanwhile, the private journey of identity continued to unfold in small, introspective moments. The palace's elaborate wardrobe preparations, the graceful rituals of formal events, and the refined aesthetics of court life resonated deeply. There was an undeniable comfort in these elements, a sense of alignment that differed from the expectations placed on a male diplomat. These feelings did not disrupt daily responsibilities, yet they lingered quietly, adding layers to an identity already rich with complexity. Despite the inner questions, Dion maintained the outward image demanded by both France and the Russian court. Composure, intelligence, and adaptability defined the role, and each passing season only strengthened Dion's reputation as someone who could be trusted in environments where certainty was rare. And although the personal truths remained hidden beneath layers of diplomatic restraint, they continued to shape the inner world, preparing the way for transformations that neither court nor crown could yet imagine. As the months passed, Dion's importance within the French mission grew almost quietly, as though woven into the daily rhythm of embassy life. Senior diplomats increasingly relied on Dion to interpret subtle political shifts and anticipate how key figures in the Russian court might react to upcoming proposals. It was not simply intelligence or training that made Dion effective. It was a natural sensitivity to atmosphere, the ability to sense tension before it surfaced, and the gift of reading between lines that others took at face value. This intuition proved invaluable during a period when Russia's internal dynamics grew especially unpredictable. Rival factions within the court vied for influence, each hoping to shape the Empress's policies in their favour. Some supported closer ties with Austria, others with Prussia, while a few favoured France's broader ambitions. Dion watched these movements with calm detachment, taking care not to appear aligned with any one group, but instead offering balanced insight whenever asked. One afternoon, during a private meeting at the embassy, the French ambassador confided that he felt the political ground shifting beneath his feet. Advisors who once supported France had grown hesitant, and rumours suggested that rival nations were gaining favour. Dion listened quietly, then offered an observation. The issue was not loyalty, but uncertainty. Russia feared being drawn too deeply into conflicts that offered little benefit. What France needed was a gesture of reassurance, something subtle, respectful, and timed to coincide with the Empress's growing interest in stability. This insight proved accurate. A carefully worded letter, delivered with a tone of cooperation rather than urgency, restored confidence and reopened channels of discussion that had begun to close. The ambassador praised Dion's intuition, calling it a rare gift in a dangerous climate, though the recognition remained private. Outside these duties, the private world within Dion continued to evolve. St. Petersburg's culture, with its elaborate ceremonies and emphasis on elegant presentation, stirred emotions that neither training nor upbringing had prepared for. The softness of fabrics, the careful arrangement of attire, and the graceful expectations placed upon courtiers created a sense of comfort that felt strangely natural. Yet expressing these feelings openly was impossible. Society saw identity in rigid terms, and the diplomatic world demanded absolute adherence to established roles. And so, the inner reflections remained hidden, emerging only in rare moments alone. When candlelight softened the room, when the palace halls grew quiet, or when evening walks offered solitude beneath a gently falling snow. These quiet reflections did not distract from the mission, but they added depth to the experience, creating a sense of duality that felt both grounding and disorienting. Still, the responsibilities at hand kept Dion focused. France needed stability, Russia needed careful handling, and the delicate art of espionage required clarity of mind. And so, each day, Dion moved gracefully through the intricate world of the court, unaware that these early murmurings of identity would one day lead to one of the most remarkable personal revelations of the century. As spring warmed the city, and the snow melted from the rooftops of St. Petersburg, the tempo of diplomatic life quickened. Foreign envoys, sensing new opportunities, arrived in increasing numbers, each determined to influence Russia's next steps on the European stage. Within this shifting atmosphere, Dion's responsibilities expanded once more. The French ambassador entrusted Dion with tasks that required a blend of tact, observation, and emotional intelligence, qualities that had become synonymous with Dion's presence at court. One of these tasks involved mediating between two influential Russian advisors whose disagreement threatened to stall important negotiations. Their conflict, rooted not only in politics but in personal pride, required delicate handling. During a private conversation, Dion listened carefully to each man's concerns, drawing out the deeper fears beneath their arguments. With patient attention and gentle reasoning, Dion managed to help each advisor see the other's perspective without assigning blame. Within days, the dispute softened and discussions resumed. The ambassador later remarked that no formal diplomatic instruction could have accomplished what simple empathy achieved. These moments strengthened Dion's standing in the embassy, yet the recognition came quietly. Success in diplomacy often meant preventing crises before they became visible, and many of Dion's most effective actions were known only to a select few. Meanwhile, the demands of the secret du roi continued in parallel. Messages from France hinted at deeper strategies unfolding in Europe, and the king's private network relied on Dion's assessments more than ever. The dual nature of this work required constant composure. A casual remark at a gathering could carry enormous significance, and a single unguarded expression could reveal more than intended. Yet Dion's adaptability made these transitions appear effortless. Beyond political matters, personal reflections grew increasingly complex. The graceful rituals of court life, the refined gestures, the delicate fabrics, the quiet moments spent preparing for official gatherings, resonated deeply. These experiences awakened emotions that felt both familiar and new, as though parts of an inner identity were quietly unfolding in response to the world around them. In private, Dion explored these feelings gently, with curiosity rather than fear. The mirror reflected a figure shaped by duty and purpose, yet the inner voice spoke softly of possibilities that could not yet be named aloud. It was a world of duality, one identity presented to society, another whispering beneath the surface. Even so, daily life allowed little time for contemplation. The French mission remained under pressure, and the shifting alliances within the Russian court demanded continuous attention. Through every challenge, Dion maintained the calm, thoughtful presence that had become invaluable to both France and the king's secret network. And though the questions of identity lingered quietly in the background, they added a depth to Dion's experience, shaping a path that would eventually lead far beyond the confines of diplomatic halls and into the heart of one of history's most extraordinary transformations. Summer brought a new intensity to St. Petersburg, not only in the weather, but in the shifting political currents that moved through the court. With European tensions rising, every ambassador sought to secure alliances, build influence, or quietly undermine the efforts of rival nations. In this environment, Dion's calm presence and subtle insight became indispensable. The French embassy relied on Dion to interpret the unpredictable moods of key figures, especially those whose loyalty wavered depending on which foreign power offered the greatest advantage. Negotiations often unfolded behind layers of courtesy, and the smallest remark could signal a major shift in opinion. Dion observed these details with exceptional clarity. During one official dinner, a prominent advisor made a brief comment that seemed unimportant to most guests, a light-hearted remark about the burdens of prolonged alliances. But Dion noted the tension hiding behind the advisor's forced smile, the way he avoided the ambassador's gaze and the slight tremor in his voice. These signs pointed to growing hesitation toward France's requests. After the gathering, Dion quietly shared this interpretation with the ambassador, suggesting a more cautious approach in the coming days. The insight proved accurate. New information soon confirmed that rival diplomats were pressing the advisor aggressively. Adjusting France's tone prevented a diplomatic setback. Even as political responsibilities grew heavier, Dion found moments of refuge in the city's gentler rhythms. Evening rides along the embankments and slow walks through the palace gardens offered rare opportunities to breathe. The soft sound of water against the riverbanks, the distant songs carried on the warm air, and the glow of lanterns at dusk created small islands of peace amid the demands of diplomacy. These quiet spaces also allowed private reflections on identity to surface more clearly. The contrast between outward expectations and inner truth became more noticeable. Wearing tailored coats and presenting as a male diplomat fulfilled the role assigned by society, yet moments involving elegance, softness, and grace awakened a deeper comfort. The feeling was subtle but persistent, an internal shift that seemed to grow stronger with each passing season. Yet in a world guided by rigid norms, such reflections had no place in open conversation. They remained private thoughts, carried quietly beneath the surface, while the visible duties of diplomacy required unwavering focus. Meanwhile, the secret du roi continued to send requests that grew increasingly complex. The king expected detailed accounts of Russia's political climate, and Dion delivered them with precision, carefully balancing honesty, caution, and intuition. Each report strengthened the king's confidence, making Dion one of the most trusted agents in his private service. Still, even with the pressures of espionage and diplomacy intertwined, Dion navigated both worlds with a grace that seemed effortless to onlookers. Only in private moments was the effort truly felt, the constant balancing of roles, appearances, and emotions. Yet these layers, both seen and unseen, would soon shape the next chapter of Dion's journey, one that would take place far beyond the glittering halls of St. Petersburg. As the summer heat settled over St. Petersburg, diplomatic life became even more unpredictable. Envoys from rival nations pushed their agendas with boldness, hoping the relaxed atmosphere of the season would loosen tongues and soften political stances. Against this backdrop, Dion's calm observation and quiet precision became essential for maintaining France's fragile advantage. One particular challenge emerged when a Prussian diplomat began spreading subtle doubts about France's reliability. His strategy was not direct confrontation but gentle suggestion. A remark slipped into a casual conversation, a raised eyebrow at the mention of French promises, a thoughtful pause that encouraged others to consider alternative alliances. These tactics, invisible to most, were clear to Dion, who recognized the pattern and alerted the French ambassador. With this insight, the embassy adjusted its tone, reinforcing France's long-term commitment through carefully timed gestures of goodwill. A minor crisis was avoided, though few understood just how close the court had come to reshaping its loyalties. The ambassador quietly acknowledged that without Dion's attentiveness, the shift might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Despite long hours and constantly shifting alliances, the rhythm of the city continued to offer small moments of peace. During warm evenings, the palace gardens filled with soft music from strolling musicians, and nobles gathered beneath the glow of lanterns to escape the stifling air indoors. In these settings, Dion observed not only politics but humanity, the way people relaxed when the formalities softened, the way laughter revealed true alliances more clearly than official statements ever could. These gatherings also deepened Dion's sense of duality. The graceful movements, flowing fabrics, and elegant rituals stirred a quiet resonance. Although dressed in attire expected of a male diplomat, Dion often found eyes drifting toward the gowns worn by women attending the events, their colours, their forms, the subtle confidence they seemed to grant. These feelings weren't merely admiration, they reflected an inner truth that felt more aligned with softness and femininity than with the rigid masculine role assigned by society. Yet such reflections remained private, guarded carefully behind the polished exterior of diplomacy. The 18th century world offered no space for exploring identity beyond strict social boundaries, and the Russian court, despite its splendour, was particularly unforgiving of deviation from established norms. Still, the internal dialogue continued, growing stronger with each passing season. Meanwhile, the responsibilities of the secret du roi demanded unwavering focus. France needed accurate, nuanced intelligence, and Dion provided it with precision, often interpreting subtle emotional cues rather than purely political ones. This ability to merge logic with empathy made Dion indispensable, and placed enormous pressure on maintaining absolute discretion. Through it all, Dion moved gracefully between tasks, blending intellect, intuition, and patience. But beneath the calm exterior, the quiet questions of identity grew steadily, shaping a path that would eventually lead to revelations far beyond anything imagined in these early years of diplomatic service. By late summer, news from France grew increasingly urgent. The 7 Years' War shifted rapidly, leaving nations scrambling for strategic advantages, and Russia's position became more important than ever. Within this tense climate, Dion's observations carried significant weight. The French embassy depended on subtle intelligence to maintain its footing, and Dion's calm awareness of emotional undercurrents often revealed more truth than official speeches. One delicate situation arose when a significant Russian advisor began distancing himself from French representatives. His excuses seemed polite, yet his absence from key meetings signalled a deeper concern. Most diplomats dismissed it as temporary fatigue, but Dion sensed something more troubling, a quiet hesitation that hinted at pressure from rival envoys. Seeking clarity, Dion arranged a discreet conversation during a small gathering at the palace. Speaking gently and without pressing too hard, Dion encouraged the advisor to share his concerns. The truth emerged. Britain had promised generous support in exchange for influence, creating a conflict of loyalty the advisor struggled to navigate. Understanding his dilemma, Dion reassured him that France sought cooperation based on long-term stability rather than immediate gain. That measured response helped restore his confidence, and within days, he reappeared at diplomatic discussions with renewed willingness to engage. The ambassador praised Dion's approach, quietly acknowledging that diplomacy often succeeded through patience rather than force. Outside political matters, the cultural richness of St. Petersburg continued to leave its mark on Dion. The city felt alive in the warm months, its canals shimmering beneath the sunlight, and its promenades filled with people enjoying music, conversation, and the brief season of ease. These gentle evenings offered a rare respite from the pressures of diplomacy, yet they also stirred deeper reflections. Watching women move gracefully in flowing summer dresses, or observing their confident ease within social circles sparked a quiet longing, a sense of recognition that went far beyond admiration. It felt like witnessing a version of life that resonated with some hidden part of the self, a part that did not align with the rigid expectations surrounding the role of a male diplomat. Still, such thoughts remained unspoken. The world of 18th century diplomacy allowed little room for exploring identity outside narrowly defined roles. Any deviation risked scandal or dismissal, consequences that would end not only a career but a reputation built with great care. And so, the internal dialogue continued quietly, surfacing in brief moments of stillness before being tucked away beneath the demands of duty. Meanwhile, responsibilities for the secret du roi became more intricate. The king requested detailed insights into Russia's shifting loyalties, and Dion's reports, composed with measured language and layers of meaning, became increasingly valued. Despite the secrecy, there was a calm satisfaction in this work. It allowed Deon to move between worlds, to interpret emotions and intentions with precision, and to serve France in a way few others could. Through it all, the duality of identity, the outward diplomat and the inner quieter truth, continued to evolve. Though hidden for now, it would one day shape the most extraordinary chapter of Dion's life, long after St. Petersburg's summer faded into memory. As autumn approached, the tone of the Russian court shifted once again. The bright ease of summer gatherings gave way to more serious discussions, and the political atmosphere thickened with uncertainty. Empress Elizabeth's advisers debated strategy behind closed doors, and rumours of new alliances rippled quietly through the palace corridors. In this environment, the French embassy leaned heavily on Dion's ability to interpret subtle signals long before they became visible to others. One significant challenge emerged when a high-ranking Russian noble, someone previously supportive of France, began showing signs of unease. His polite smiles remained, yet there was a new distance in his posture, a hesitation in his tone whenever French interests were mentioned. Many diplomats interpreted this as a simple shift in mood brought on by the pressures of the season, but Dion sensed something deeper, something tied to more than politics. Choosing a careful approach, Dion requested a private walk through the palace gardens, a place where conversations could unfold without prying ears. As they strolled along paths lined with turning leaves, the noble revealed his concerns with unusual honesty. He feared that France, burdened by war and strained resources, would be unable to uphold its promises. He worried that siding too closely with one nation would expose Russia to considerable risk. Listening with patience, Dion responded not with grand assurances but with quiet reasoning. France sought balance, cooperation, and mutual benefit, not reckless commitments. The tone was measured, respectful, and genuine, qualities the noble valued deeply. By the end of their walk, the tension had softened. While uncertainties remained, trust had been partially restored. These small human exchanges made diplomacy possible in a climate where official declarations often created more confusion than clarity. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi continued to request information of increasing delicacy. The king's private service wanted insight not only into political decisions, but into personal dynamics shaping those decisions, friendships, rivalries, hidden fears. Dion provided these observations with precision, often noting details others overlooked. The way an advisor hesitated before agreeing to a proposal, the quiet disappointment in a noble's eyes after a public disagreement, or the subtle shift in the Empress's manner when certain names were mentioned. These emotional nuances carried as much meaning as formal treaties. Outside the realm of espionage and politics, the private world inside Dion grew richer, more complex. In moments of solitude, the thoughts that had lingered quietly for months returned with increasing clarity. Identity felt fluid, more expansive than the strict boundaries imposed by society. Watching women at court, their elegance, their confidence, their embrace of softness, stirred a quiet recognition that felt both comforting and impossible to express. Yet survival demanded silence. The 18th century allowed no space for revealing an inner truth that defied expectation. And so, the reflections remained hidden, tucked beneath layers of restraint. Still, they shaped the way Dion saw the world, adding depth to every observation, every diplomatic interaction, and every moment spent walking alone through the city. As autumn deepened and the nights grew colder, the divide between public role and private identity became more pronounced. But even as this duality intensified, it also strengthened the quiet resilience that had always guided Dion, a resilience that would soon be tested in profound ways as the next chapter of this remarkable life began to unfold. As the chill of autumn settled over St. Petersburg, the demands of diplomacy sharpened. Political tensions across Europe continued to shift, and the French embassy needed clear, reliable insight more than ever. Dion's calm presence became a steady anchor in an environment where certainty was rare. The ambassador increasingly sought Dion's opinion before engaging in delicate conversations, trusting the intuition that had already prevented several missteps. One complicated matter involved a planned military coordination that required Russia's cautious approval. The proposal was sound, but timing was fragile. Several advisors had grown hesitant, influenced by rival nations promising easier solutions. During an evening gathering, Dion watched the interactions closely. A single remark from a senior Russian official, seemingly light and joking, revealed a deeper anxiety. It was enough to signal that pushing the matter too soon could cause the entire discussion to collapse. After the event, Dion quietly advised delaying the proposal, suggesting a gentler approach that emphasized mutual security rather than urgency. Days later, it became clear this was the right choice. An unexpected dispute had erupted within the Empress's council, leaving advisors uneasy and easily offended. Had France pressed forward too quickly, the consequences might have been severe. The ambassador praised Dion for anticipating what others had missed. Yet these successes came with growing personal complexity. In moments of solitude, Dion felt the quiet pull of an identity that did not match the role presented to the world. The soft elegance of the court, its fabrics, gestures, and rituals, felt strangely familiar, as though reflecting an inner truth that had remained hidden for years. These thoughts appeared gently, without alarm, but their persistence made them impossible to ignore. Still, they remained private. A diplomat's survival depended on composure, conformity, and secrecy. Any deviation could cost not only position but safety. The Russian court, for all its grandeur, provided little room for a person to explore or reveal a self that broke from traditional expectations, and so the duality deepened. Dion continued to serve France with exceptional loyalty, writing detailed reports for the Secret du Roi and navigating the emotional landscape of the Russian court with remarkable grace. But beneath the surface, an internal transformation slowly took shape. Quiet, patient, waiting for a time when truth could safely emerge. For now, diplomacy demanded full attention. The season ahead promised new challenges, shifting alliances and decisions that would shape not only nations, but the path of Dion's extraordinary journey. As winter crept back into St. Petersburg, the palace returned to its familiar rhythm of grand ceremonies, quiet intrigues, and long nights lit by chandeliers. The cold sharpened the city's edges, but inside the court emotions ran warm and unpredictable. Foreign envoys used the long season to build alliances, gather information, and quietly test each other's intentions. Within this flurry of activity, Dion's role grew even more vital. One evening during a formal reception, a subtle shift occurred that only a few noticed. A prominent Russian advisor, usually confident, even bold, appeared unusually withdrawn. His responses were slower, his smile forced, and his attention seemed divided between conversations and some unspoken worry. Most diplomats carried on without concern, but Dion sensed something fragile beneath the surface. During a quiet moment, Dion approached him with gentle conversation, not about politics, but about the long winter ahead. The advisor relaxed slightly, revealing that he had been pressured by rival envoys who promised quick advantages if he distanced himself from France. Listening patiently, Dion offered reassurance without pushing for immediate decisions. The simplicity of being heard eased the advisor's tension, and within days he resumed his usual confidence in diplomatic meetings. It was a small victory, but one that prevented significant trouble. These interactions highlighted Dion's unique strength, understanding the emotional world that shaped political decisions. While others focused on strategy, Dion sensed fear, hesitation, pride, and hope, the true forces behind diplomacy. Yet beneath these responsibilities, the quiet exploration of identity grew more persistent. Preparing for formal events required careful attention to clothing and presentation, and this process stirred feelings that felt both comforting and complicated. The elegance of the fabrics, the delicate craftsmanship of the attire worn by women at court, and the grace with which they moved resonated deeply with Dion's inner world. These experiences awakened a sense of recognition, a quiet truth that seemed to rise each time the mirror reflected a figure that felt incomplete. But the world outside left no space for such reflections. In the 18th century, identity was fixed, expectations rigid, and deviation dangerous. Dion knew that even the slightest hint of questioning these roles could bring scandal or ruin, and so the private truth remained carefully guarded, hidden beneath loyalty, discipline, and the polished composure of a diplomat. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi continued to rely on Dion's insight. Reports sent to France included careful descriptions of alliances, personalities, and the emotional climate of the Russian court. These analyses had become essential to the king's private strategy, and Dion's accuracy strengthened the bond of trust that few in the network enjoyed. Still, even with these growing pressures, Dion maintained a calm and steady presence, navigating each challenge with intuition and quiet resilience. Little by little, the duality of life, the visible role and the hidden identity, began to shape not only how Dion saw the world, but how the world would one day remember this remarkable figure. As the winter deepened and the city grew quieter beneath heavy layers of snow, the Russian court turned inward, focusing on private gatherings, strategic conversations, and the slow, deliberate shaping of political intentions for the coming year. For the French embassy, this season required heightened awareness. Every gesture, every pause, every small shift in opinion mattered. Dion, with a calm and sensitive understanding of these nuances, became an indispensable guide through the delicate maze of winter diplomacy. One evening, during a smaller, more intimate gathering at the palace, Dion noticed an unusual pattern. A group of mid-level advisors, typically neutral in their discussions, had begun echoing subtle arguments that favoured a rival power. Their tone was cautious, but their alignment was unmistakable. Suspicion arose not from their words, but from how carefully they avoided speaking to French representatives. Dion, observing from a quiet corner of the room, sensed that something external had influenced their sudden shift. Instead of confronting them directly, Dion approached one of the more approachable advisors later in the evening, speaking casually about mundane matters, the bitter cold, the upcoming festivities, the challenges of travel in winter. This gentle approach eased the advisor's guarded posture, and eventually he revealed a small but valuable detail. Foreign envoys had been spreading misinformation to sow doubt about France's long-term stability. Armed with this insight, Dion provided the embassy with a clear picture of what was unfolding behind the scenes. The ambassador responded by arranging a few carefully placed gestures of goodwill, subtle reassurances that countered the rival propaganda without drawing attention. Within a week, the advisors began shifting back toward their previous neutrality. Another quiet crisis avoided. These diplomatic victories were accompanied by a growing internal dialogue that Dion could no longer ignore. In the privacy of personal quarters, away from the expectations of the court, Dion found increasing comfort in imagining a life lived with the softness and elegance observed in women at court. It was not a fleeting curiosity but a steady truth, rising with each passing month. Clothing, once merely a symbol of duty, now felt like a barrier between the outer role and the inner self. The reflection in the mirror seemed incomplete, shaped by society's expectations rather than authentic identity. Still, revealing these feelings was impossible. Even a whisper of such thoughts could destroy everything: diplomatic trust, personal reputation, and years of careful work. And so the inner truth remained hidden, explored only in quiet moments or fleeting imaginations sparked by the graceful rituals of court life. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi continued to rely on Dion's insight, which had proven invaluable in predicting emotional reactions and assessing hidden motives. The reports sent to France during this winter were among the most thorough yet. capturing not only political developments, but the human fears and ambitions driving them. Through each challenge, both external and internal, Dion maintained the composure that had become a hallmark of this diplomatic journey, unaware that the next chapters would bring dramatic shifts that would forever transform the path ahead. As winter slowly loosened its grip and the first hints of spring touched St. Petersburg, the political landscape began to move again. The court, revived by the promise of warmer days, returned to its lively gatherings and strategic conversations. For the French embassy, this transition meant new opportunities, but also new risks. With every shift in weather came a shift in temperament, and Dion understood better than most how fragile diplomatic momentum could be. During this period, an unexpected situation tested that understanding. A respected Russian general, long considered a quiet supporter of France, suddenly distanced himself from any discussions involving French interests. His manner remained polite, but his avoidance was unmistakable. Some diplomats assumed he was simply overburdened by military responsibilities, but Dion sensed deeper tension, something rooted in personal conflict rather than political strategy. Seeking clarity, Dion arranged a chance meeting at a modest cultural event, a small musical performance favoured by nobles seeking a break from court formality. The general attended alone, appearing lost in thought. With gentle conversation, Dion slowly encouraged him to speak openly. It became clear that the general feared that aligning too closely with France would jeopardise his standing in an increasingly divided military council. His loyalty remained intact, but his position felt uncertain. Dion responded with the same quiet steadiness that had reassured so many others, acknowledging the general's concerns without pressing for immediate decisions. By offering understanding rather than pressure, the tension eased. Days later, the general re-engaged with diplomatic discussions, and the crisis dissolved before it became visible to the rest of the embassy. Meanwhile, the private landscape within Dion continued to deepen in complexity. Spring's gentle light brought moments of introspection that felt impossible during the harsh winter. The shift in seasons seemed to echo something internal, a growing recognition of identity that felt increasingly difficult to silence. Observing the women at court as they prepared for the new season, exchanging darker winter fabrics for lighter, flowing dresses, stirred a sense of longing that had nothing to do with admiration and everything to do with recognition. These feelings were steady, unmistakable, and profoundly personal, but they remained locked within, hidden behind the poised exterior that diplomacy demanded. Expressing them was unthinkable in the rigid world of 18th century politics, where identity was defined strictly and deviation would mean ruin. And yet, the truth grew stronger with each passing month. At the same time, the Secret du Roi continued to depend on Dion's insight into Russia's emotional and political climate. Reports had become more detailed, reflecting not only events but the subtle fears, hopes, and interpersonal dynamics shaping them. This information was invaluable to France, and the king's trust in Dion deepened. Despite the pressures, diplomatic, political and personal, Dion continued to move with remarkable composure through the ever-shifting world of the Russian court. But beneath the quiet surface, a transformation was taking shape, one that would eventually redefine not just diplomatic history, but the very understanding of who Dion truly was. As spring matured and the days grew longer, the Russian court entered a season of renewed energy. Ambassadors gathered more frequently, each seeking to interpret the subtle changes in the empress's priorities. The French embassy, already under pressure to maintain its influence, relied heavily on Dion's perceptive understanding of both people and atmosphere. Every gesture seemed magnified in importance, and Dion remained attentive, sensing meaning in details easily overlooked by others. One evening, during a diplomatic salon filled with music and quiet conversation, Dion observed an unexpected exchange. A young Russian official, previously eager to speak with French representatives, now kept his distance. His attempt to appear relaxed was betrayed by the stiffness in his posture and the way his eyes avoided certain topics. Recognizing the signs, Dion allowed the evening to unfold naturally before approaching him later, with a gentle, informal conversation about cultural matters. The official gradually softened, revealing that he had been warned by foreign envoys that France was losing its footing in the wider conflict. The fear of aligning with a failing power, as it had been framed to him, created internal conflict. Dion listened carefully, then offered reassurance rooted not in promises but in perspective. France's intentions, Dion explained, extended far beyond short-term alliances. They were built on lasting cooperation and shared interests. This measured explanation eased the young official's concerns, and within days his confidence visibly returned, restoring a connection that might otherwise have been lost. These diplomatic successes were quiet victories, rarely recognized publicly but vital to maintaining stability. At the same time, Dion's inner world continued to evolve with growing clarity. As the season shifted, the gentle warmth of spring brought softer colours and lighter fabrics to the court. Women returned to wearing flowing dresses, embroidered shawls, and elegant accessories that carried a sense of grace and possibility. These scenes stirred something deeply personal in Dion, a truth that had lived unspoken for years, a recognition that the identity presented to the world did not align with the identity felt within. The comfort found in elegance, the quiet yearning towards softness, and the sense of authenticity these moments awakened grew stronger with each passing day. But expressing such a truth in this era was unthinkable. In the rigid world of 18th century diplomacy, even the slightest deviation from established roles could result in scandal, dismissal, or far worse. And so the truth remained hidden behind a polished exterior, explored only in solitude, in brief glances at a mirror that reflected a life constrained by duty. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi continued to rely on Dion's insight more than ever. Reports sent to France during this season were filled with careful analysis of alliances, emotional tensions, and the subtle shifts in loyalty that guided Russia's decisions. These observations shaped the king's private strategy and reinforced Dion's position as one of his most trusted agents. Through every challenge, political, personal, and emotional, Dion carried on with unwavering composure, unaware that the next chapter of life would bring dramatic changes that would ultimately reveal the truth long kept hidden beneath the layers of diplomacy and expectation. As the brightness of late spring settled over St. Petersburg, the Russian court entered a period of subtle but meaningful transition. The social season grew livelier, and invitations to gatherings increased, offering diplomats endless opportunities to observe shifting alliances. For the French embassy, this meant renewed pressure to maintain influence at a time when rival nations were becoming increasingly assertive. Through it all, Dion served as the steady centre of the mission, calm, perceptive, and unshaken by the constant political noise. One afternoon, during a modest tea gathering hosted by a well-connected noblewoman, Dion noticed something that others seemed to miss. A respected military advisor who normally spoke confidently about international affairs now chose his words with noticeable caution. His deliberate pauses, the way he glanced toward foreign envoys before answering, and the slight tension in his hands suggested that something had unsettled him. Dion approached him later with a gentle, unthreatening question about recent military reviews. That small opening allowed the advisor to confide quietly. Rival diplomats had been pressuring him to support a treaty that sidelined French interests. Though tempted, he felt conflicted and unsure whom to trust. Dion responded with the same careful, empathetic tone that had calmed so many troubled officials. Instead of urging him toward France, Dion spoke about the value of long-term stability, how decisions made in haste could ripple across nations for years. The advisor seemed relieved to be treated with respect rather than persuasion. Within days, his confidence returned, and he resumed his balanced stance, preventing a potential loss of support for France. These small moments, handled with patience and emotional insight, formed the backbone of effective diplomacy, even though they rarely appeared in official records. Meanwhile, the private world inside Dion continued to grow more vivid. Spring's warmth encouraged lighter clothing and softer colours, and court fashion flourished in shades of silk, lace, and delicate embroidery. Watching women move gracefully through the palace, confident, expressive, at ease in their elegance, stirred a profound recognition within Dion. It was as though the truest version of self existed somewhere within those gestures and forms, concealed beneath the required attire and roles of a male diplomat. The longing was no longer subtle. It felt like a quiet truth pressing gently but steadily against the boundaries of daily life. Mirror reflections revealed not just the face of a diplomat, but a person who could not fully exist within the shape society demanded. Yet expressing any part of this identity remained unthinkable. The 18th century offered no protection, no understanding, and no space for such authenticity. The world required silence, and silence became a survival skill. Still, the truth lived on quietly, shaping the emotional landscape beneath every diplomatic conversation, every secret letter, and every evening spent alone in deep reflection. Through all of this, the Secret du Roi continued to rely heavily on Dion. Reports were sent with careful nuance, capturing not only political events, but the emotional and personal dynamics that defined them. The king's private network prized these insights, and Dion's reputation within that hidden circle grew stronger than ever. Yet even as responsibilities multiplied, the quiet transformation within continued to unfold, a truth waiting patiently for the moment when life would finally allow it to be fully seen. As summer approached, the diplomatic environment in St. Petersburg became more intense. Warm weather brought frequent gatherings, elaborate receptions, and countless quiet conversations behind fans and folded letters. This was the season when alliances could shift with a single remark, and the French embassy depended more than ever on subtle observation. Dion, with an almost instinctive sense for emotional undercurrents, moved through these events with calm precision. One evening, during a grand reception crowded with foreign envoys, Dion noticed a peculiar dynamic unfolding near the edge of the room. A mid-ranking Russian official, typically courteous toward the French delegation, now appeared unusually evasive. He spoke briefly with Austrian and Prussian representatives, avoiding eye contact with his French colleagues. His posture was tense, his replies brief, and his smile restrained. While others assumed he was simply overwhelmed by the crowd, Dion sensed a deeper discomfort rooted in conflicting loyalties. Choosing a moment when the official stepped away from the crowd, Dion approached gently with a casual conversation about the performance earlier in the evening. The official, disarmed by the non-political topic, allowed his guard to drop. Gradually, he revealed that he had been pressured by foreign envoys who warned him that supporting France might place his future at risk. Their warnings had shaken him, creating doubt where confidence once stood. Dion listened with patience, then quietly offered perspective rather than persuasion. France, Dion explained, valued thoughtful partnership over impulsive allegiance. Decisions rooted in fear rarely led to good outcomes, while those grounded in stability provided strength to both sides. This simple, steady reassurance eased the tension clouding the official's mind. Within days, he resumed his balanced stance, no longer swayed by the warnings of rival diplomats. While these victories remained invisible to the wider world, they were essential to maintaining France's fragile influence. Yet beneath the polished diplomacy, the quiet transformation inside Dion continued to deepen. Summer brought light, warmth, and a renewed sense of expression among the women at court. Their dresses shifted to soft pastels, their movements seemed freer, and the air carried an ease that contrasted sharply with the rigid expectations placed on men. Observing them stirred something profoundly personal within Dion, a deep longing, a pull toward an identity that felt far truer than the world allowed. It was not merely appreciation for elegance, it was recognition. Each gown, each graceful gesture, each quiet confidence seemed to mirror an inner truth that had lived unspoken for years. In private moments, Dion imagined existing in such attire, moving through the world with the same authenticity and softness. But such thoughts could never be voiced. The rules of society were inflexible, and deviation meant ruin, and so the inner truth remained hidden, revealed only in fleeting daydreams or the quiet ache beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi continued to rely heavily on D'Eon's reports. They grew more intricate as political tensions deepened, capturing not just events, but the emotional subtleties driving them. The king valued this insight, seeing in D'Eon someone uniquely capable of understanding the human side of diplomacy. Through it all, D'Eon maintained composure, navigating both public duty and private truth with steady grace. Yet the divide between inner identity and outer role grew sharper each day, foreshadowing the remarkable turning point soon to come in D'Eon's extraordinary life. As the height of summer settled over St. Petersburg, diplomacy entered one of its most delicate phases. Rival nations pressed harder, aware that any shift in the Russian court could influence the broader conflicts reshaping Europe. The French embassy, though still respected, felt the pressure tightening from all directions. In this atmosphere, D'Eon's gift for sensing the emotional landscape became more valuable than ever. One particular event tested this gift: a formal gathering hosted by a powerful noble family, attended by advisors whose opinions shaped Russia's foreign policy. Throughout the evening, D'Eon observed a subtle but undeniable pattern. Certain courtiers, once neutral, now echoed carefully crafted talking points that favoured Prussian interests. Their phrasing was too consistent to be coincidence. Most diplomats dismissed these remarks as idle chatter, but D'Eon understood that such conversations often mark the early stages of a significant shift. Later that night, D'Eon approached one of the courtiers, choosing a gentle conversation about literature rather than politics. The courtier relaxed, eventually admitting in a roundabout way that Prussian envoys had been making bold promises behind closed doors. They painted France as weakened, urging Russia to reconsider its position before it became unwise to remain aligned. D'Eon listened calmly, offering reassurance not through argument but through understanding. France, D'Eon suggested, valued decisions rooted in long-term wisdom, not in short-lived political storms. The courtier appreciated the sincerity, and seemed relieved to have his uncertainty acknowledged rather than exploited. Subtle reassurance was often more powerful than direct persuasion, yet diplomacy was only one part of the story unfolding. Internally, D'Eon's reflections on identity became more vivid with each passing week. The soft colours and flowing designs of summer attire worn by the women at court evoked a sense of longing that could no longer be dismissed as fleeting curiosity. It felt like witnessing an expression of self that had been quietly carried inside for years, a self that aligned with grace, femininity, and authenticity far more naturally than the masculine role imposed by society. In private quarters, these emotions surfaced with increasing clarity. Dressing for official events became a reminder of the divide between public expectation and inner truth. The tailored coats and formal attire felt like armour rather than clothing, an outer shell protecting a self that could not safely reveal its true form. Yet there was no path, no language, no place in the 18th century where such feelings could be expressed. Identity was fixed, unquestioned, and strictly policed. Stepping outside those boundaries would mean certain ruin, and so the truth remained hidden behind measured words, polished manners, and unwavering composure. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi placed more trust in D'Eon than ever before. Reports grew longer, filled with precise descriptions of advisors' fears, rival diplomats' tactics, and the emotional tides shaping Russia's decisions. These insights influenced the king's private plans and positioned D'Eon as one of the most indispensable agents in his hidden network. Still, with every victory and every negotiation, the tension between public role and private self grew sharper. The inner truth no longer whispered. It waited, patient and insistent, knowing that change, however impossible it seemed, would one day demand to be lived. As late summer settled into the Russian court, The social atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of decisions yet to be made. Diplomats sensed that the coming months would shape alliances in ways that could alter the entire balance of Europe. In this fragile environment, Dion moved with practiced calm, reading the subtle cues behind every conversation. The ability to sense uncertainty, insecurity, or shifting loyalty in others had become one of the embassy's greatest strengths. One evening, at a private dinner hosted by a noble known for his sharp political instincts, a small but revealing moment occurred. A senior advisor, usually firm in his support of France, spoke with an unfamiliar hesitation. His voice softened at key moments, and he repeatedly redirected the conversation away from military matters. To most of the table, his behaviour appeared insignificant, but to Dion it signalled internal conflict. After the dinner, Dion approached him during a quiet moment near the terrace, beginning with a conversation about the approaching autumn. The advisor, comforted by the gentle tone, opened up slowly. He admitted that he was troubled by rumours claiming that France was quietly negotiating agreements that would disadvantage Russia. Though the rumours were false, their persistence had shaken him. Dion listened with steady attention, then offered reassurance grounded not in denial but in context. France relied on mutual trust and did not benefit from weakening its allies. The advisor exhaled with visible relief, grateful to speak honestly without fear of judgment. In the days that followed, his confidence returned, and he resumed advocating for balanced cooperation between the two nations. These delicate interactions, invisible to most, were the foundation of successful diplomacy, each one preventing tensions from spreading through the court. Yet beneath the successes, Dion's inner world continued to expand in complexity. The warm weather encouraged lighter, freer fashions among the women at court, soft fabrics, elegant silhouettes, and graceful movements that seemed to express a kind of authenticity that resonated deeply within. Each time Dion observed these moments, a quiet truth stirred. The identity presented to the world felt increasingly at odds with the identity felt within. These emotions were no longer subtle. They revealed themselves in the quiet moments before dressing for official events, when the reflection in the mirror felt distant and incomplete. The masculine attire, the structured coats, the rigid expectations, all felt like barriers to a self that had no place in the strict social order of the time. But revealing any part of this truth was impossible. Society demanded conformity, and the consequences for stepping beyond accepted boundaries were unthinkable. And so, the inner authentic self remained hidden, protected by silence. Meanwhile, the secret du roi continued depending heavily on Dion's insight. Reports grew increasingly detailed, describing not only political developments, but the emotional tensions driving them. Jealousy among envoys, insecurity among advisors, or ambition disguised beneath courtesy. These observations shaped the king's private strategies more than any official document ever could. Through it all, Dion navigated diplomacy with grace, carrying both the weight of espionage and the quiet burden of an identity that could not yet be lived. But change was drawing closer. The world around Dion was beginning to shift, and with it came the first signs of a turning point that would transform not only the course of a career, but the course of a life. As autumn approached once more, St. Petersburg entered a season of restrained anticipation. Advisors grew cautious, envoys watched one another with heightened alertness, and every diplomatic conversation carried the weight of future consequences. For France, this period was critical. The war in Europe continued to reshape alliances, and the French embassy needed precise insight to maintain its position. Dion, now central to this effort, moved through each day with practiced composure, sensing the smallest shifts in mood around the court. One afternoon, during a subdued gathering in a noble residence, Dion noticed an unexpected silence between two influential Russian advisors who normally spoke easily with each other. Their glances were brief, their expressions tight, and their conversations with foreign envoys seemed guarded. Understanding that something significant had changed, Dion approached one of them later in the evening with a light conversation about recent cultural performances. Gradually, the tension began to ease, and the advisor revealed his concern. A series of alarming letters had circulated privately, suggesting that France planned to forge alliances without consulting Russia. These letters, secretly distributed by a rival envoy, were designed to disrupt trust between the nations. Dion listened with patience, then gently explained that such rumours were part of a larger strategy to create doubt where none existed. The advisor, reassured by the calm clarity, expressed relief at being understood rather than dismissed. In the following days, the false rumours lost momentum and relations stabilised. Once again, diplomacy succeeded not through force, but through sensitivity and steady presence. Meanwhile, Dion's private journey continued to grow increasingly complex. As autumn's cooler winds returned, so did the heavier layers of court attire. Watching women drape themselves in rich fabrics, with gowns flowing softly at every movement, stirred emotions that had become impossible to ignore. Their elegance reflected a truth inside Dion, a truth that longed for expression, yet remained locked behind the expectations imposed by society. The contrast between external role and internal identity sharpened daily. Preparing for official events, Dion felt the weight of masculine attire like an unwelcome armour, concealing a self that felt gentler, more fluid, more authentically aligned with femininity. The inner voice that had once whispered now spoke clearly, insisting that this hidden identity was real, undeniable, and quietly waiting for its rightful place in the world. Yet revealing it remained unthinkable. The court's strict norms offered no room for such expression, and the consequences of breaking them would be catastrophic. And so the truth remained guarded, present in every thoughtful glance, every moment of solitude, and every quiet yearning that surfaced when watching the graceful movements of women at court. At the same time, the Secret du Roi relied increasingly on Dion's emotional intelligence and precise observations. The reports sent to France during this season were some of the most detailed yet, capturing the subtle fears and hidden motivations driving Russia's political decisions. These insights strengthened the king's trust in Dion and shaped strategies that would influence Europe's unfolding future. But beneath the diplomatic success, the tension between public duty and private truth grew stronger, setting the stage for the extraordinary turning point that would soon reshape the entire trajectory of Dion's life. As the crisp air of early autumn settled over St. Petersburg, the rhythm of court life shifted again. The glittering summer gatherings faded into more calculated, intimate meetings where real decisions were shaped. The Russian court, aware of Europe's changing tides, approached every discussion with renewed caution. For the French embassy, this meant increased pressure to secure trust and maintain influence at a moment when alliances could realign with little warning. Dion moved through this atmosphere with steady composure, interpreting subtle changes in behaviour that others often overlooked. At one small diplomatic supper, a high-ranking Russian statesman, normally decisive and confident, appeared distracted. His responses were hesitant, and his usual firm posture seemed slightly withdrawn. Many assumed he was simply tired, but Dion recognised the deeper signs of someone burdened by an unspoken dilemma. Later, when the gathering quieted, Dion approached him with gentle conversation about the approaching winter and recent cultural performances at the palace. The statesman, soothed by the non-political tone, gradually shared his concerns. He had received private messages implying that France no longer considered Russia a strategic priority. These messages, crafted by rival envoys, had planted seeds of doubt that threatened months of diplomatic progress. Dion listened attentively, offering reassurance rooted not in dismissing the rumours, but in addressing the fear beneath them. France, Dion explained, valued Russia as a partner whose strength and stability were essential to the broader European balance. The statesman's tension eased. Within days, his confidence in France returned, and the rumours lost their influence. These quiet interventions, invisible to the public eye, were the backbone of successful diplomacy. Yet beneath the calm exterior, Dion's inner world continued to evolve with striking clarity. As the season shifted, so did the attire of women at court. Richer fabrics, deeper colours, elegant layers that moved with softness despite the encroaching cold. Each glimpse stirred something profoundly personal within Dion, a deep recognition that extended far beyond admiration. It felt like witnessing expressions of a self long held in silence. Every gown, every gentle movement, every detail of feminine grace intensified the awareness that the life lived outwardly did not reflect the truth within. The masculine role, required by duty and societal order, felt increasingly foreign. The mirror showed what the world expected, but the inner voice spoke unwaveringly of a feminine identity waiting to be lived. These were not passing thoughts or dreams. They were truths that had grown quietly for years, now pressing gently but persistently against the boundaries of silence. Yet revealing them remained impossible. The world of diplomacy, rigid and unforgiving, allowed no deviation from strict roles, and so the truth remained hidden, forming a second life beneath the surface, a private existence composed of longing, recognition, and quiet resilience. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi demanded more insight than ever. France relied on Dion's ability to interpret not only the politics but the emotions driving them, and each report reflected a deep understanding unmatched by others in the network. These insights shaped the king's decisions and kept France informed of shifts even before they fully emerged. Through all of this, Dion carried both the responsibilities of espionage and the quiet burden of an unspoken identity. But change was drawing near, a change that would move Dion from the shadows of diplomacy into a life lived more fully, though not without immense cost. As autumn deepened and the first hints of winter crept into St. Petersburg, the political atmosphere grew taut with anticipation. Allies hesitated, rivals pressed harder, and every envoy sought to secure influence before the year's final decisions were made. The French embassy, conscious of how fragile its standing had become, depended on Dion more than ever. Each gathering, each whispered conversation, carried meaning that could shift the balance between nations. During one particularly tense evening at the palace, Dion noticed an advisor whose demeanour had subtly changed. Normally warm and open, he now avoided direct discussion, offering vague answers and polite smiles that didn't reach his eyes. Most diplomats interpreted his behaviour as simple fatigue, but Dion recognised the unmistakable signs of someone torn between pressure and responsibility. Later, during a quieter moment near the edge of the hall, Dion approached him with a gentle conversation about his family and plans for the coming winter. The advisor, relieved to speak without political weight, gradually revealed his fear. He believed France might soon withdraw from key commitments, leaving Russia isolated. These concerns stemmed from rumours spread by an ambitious foreign envoy hoping to weaken French influence. Dion responded with calm sincerity, explaining that France valued long-term cooperation and sought stability rather than opportunistic gains. The advisor listened intently, and by the end of the conversation, the doubt that had clouded his judgment began to fade. Within days, he resumed his usual confidence, and the rumour lost its momentum. These quiet interventions shaped diplomacy far more than grand speeches, though they remained unseen by most. Meanwhile, the inner world within Dion continued to expand with undeniable clarity. The heavy coats and tailored attire required for the season felt increasingly uncomfortable, not because of their weight, but because they reinforced an identity that no longer aligned with the truth inside. Watching women at court wear elegant winter gowns, their movements soft and expressive even in layered clothing, stirred a deep sense of recognition that had grown too strong to dismiss. It was as though each detail, a graceful gesture, a silken sleeve, a subtle smile, echoed a truth carried in silence since childhood. The person the world saw and the person Dion truly was had grown impossibly distant from one another, yet revealing that truth remained unthinkable. The strict expectations of 18th century society left no space for such authenticity. Diplomacy demanded conformity, and stepping beyond its rules would bring immediate ruin. And so the truth lived quietly within, shaping every private moment, a sense of identity waiting patiently for a future where it could be expressed without fear. At the same time, the Secret du Roi relied more heavily on Dion than ever. Reports during this season were meticulously crafted, revealing not only the political strategies at play, but the emotional vulnerabilities that guided them. These insights strengthened the king's trust and influenced decisions far beyond the reach of the official embassy. Yet beneath the steady work and outward confidence, the divide between public duty and private truth grew sharper with each passing week, preparing the way for the profound transformation that soon awaited Dion beyond the cold horizons of the Russian winter. As winter settled heavily over St. Petersburg, the brilliance of the court dimmed beneath layers of frost and caution. The season brought fewer grand gatherings and more private councils, where decisions were made behind closed doors and the stakes seemed to rise with each passing week. Rival envoys, sensing France's precarious position, became increasingly bold in their attempts to sway Russian officials. Yet in this tightening atmosphere, Dion remained a quiet constant, composed, perceptive, and remarkably attuned to the emotional undercurrents that shaped diplomacy. During one small winter supper at a noble residence, a discreet but significant shift became apparent. A well-respected advisor, previously enthusiastic about collaborating with France, now spoke with a subdued restraint. His answers were layered, cautious, and tinged with unease. Some diplomats dismissed his mood as the effect of the long winter, but Dion sensed a deeper concern hiding beneath his steady exterior. Seeking clarity, Dion approached him later by the warmth of a fireplace, beginning with a light conversation about seasonal traditions. The advisor, comforted by the gentle tone, revealed a quiet fear. He believed France had begun negotiating in ways that might threaten Russia's long-term interests. These worries stemmed from carefully planted rumours spread by an opposing envoy, whose goal was to fracture trust between the two nations. Dion listened with the same patience that had diffused countless moments of tension, then offered perspective that calmed the advisor's doubts. France, Dion explained, sought cooperation, not manipulation, and valued continuity over abrupt change. Reassured, the advisor agreed to revisit his assumptions. Within days, his confidence returned, preventing what might have become a serious diplomatic setback. Yet even as Dion navigated these challenges with unwavering discipline, the inner world grew more turbulent and more truthful. The Russian winter, with its heavy garments and layered attire, made public expectations feel increasingly confining. The masculine clothing required for diplomatic appearances felt foreign on the skin, stiff, restrictive, and misaligned with the identity quietly unfolding within. Observing the women at court during winter festivities only deepened that sense of recognition. Their gowns shimmered beneath candlelight, their movements remained soft even in the cold, and their expressions carried a natural authenticity that resonated powerfully with Dion's hidden self. These were not fleeting impressions. They were affirmations of an inner truth that had grown over years of silence. The reflection in the mirror seemed less like a representation of self, and more like a costume demanded by circumstance. The divide between the inner identity and the outer role widened until it felt almost impossible to ignore. But society offered no space for such truth. The consequences of revealing it would be immediate and devastating. And so, the identity remained hidden, cherished privately, carried like a delicate flame protected from the harsh winds of the world. Meanwhile, the Secret du Roi placed unprecedented trust in Dion's reports. These documents, crafted with exceptional nuance, captured not only the factual developments at court, but the emotional shifts that determined outcomes. The king relied on these insights to guide decisions that shaped France's position across Europe. Through every challenge, Dion remained dedicated, navigating both diplomacy and personal duality with extraordinary resilience. But the world was changing, and soon the path ahead would lead away from Russia, toward revelations that would redefine not only Dion's life, but the way history understood identity itself. As the harsh winter pressed on and the year drew toward its end, the atmosphere in St. Petersburg reached a fragile stillness. Diplomats felt the tension in every conversation, aware that the shifting balance of European power demanded constant vigilance. Whispers of new alliances, secret promises, and unexpected betrayals drifted through the palace corridors, creating an environment where even a single misinterpreted gesture could alter months of work. For the French embassy, this meant leaning more heavily than ever on Dion's rare ability to sense the emotional truth behind the court's polished surfaces. One night, during a tightly controlled private gathering, a crucial moment tested that insight. A senior Russian minister, one whose support France had relied on for years, seemed unusually withdrawn. His voice carried a faint tremor, and though he spoke politely, something in his eyes suggested worry. Most in attendance assumed he was preoccupied with domestic matters, but Dion recognized the subtle markers of doubt shaped by external pressure. Later, as the evening quieted and guests lingered near the windows overlooking the icy Neva, Dion approached him with a gentle conversation about the stillness of winter nights. The minister, comforted by the soft, non-political tone, slowly revealed that he feared France was entering negotiations that could weaken Russia's interests. These fears, he admitted, came from private warnings delivered by envoys who hoped to fracture long-standing trust. Dion listened steadily, offering clarity without force. France, Dion explained, was committed to preserving balance and cooperation. Any suggestion otherwise was part of a broader strategy to sow doubt. The minister's tension eased as the truth settled in, and within days he re-engaged with France's representatives with renewed assurance. Another silent crisis resolved, one of many shaped not by grand declarations, but by empathy and thoughtful presence. Yet even as diplomacy held together, the quiet inner world within Dion had reached a point of undeniable truth. The long months of winter, with their heavy layers and rigid expectations, amplified the tension between the identity displayed publicly and the identity that lived, vividly and authentically, within. The masculine attire required for diplomatic appearances felt more suffocating than ever, each tailored line reinforcing a role that no longer reflected reality. Meanwhile, observing the women at court, their grace, their layered gowns, their natural ease within femininity sparked a deep sense of recognition that felt like coming home to a truth long carried in secret. The divide between inner self and outer presentation had grown too wide to ignore. The image in the mirror felt like a character in someone else's life, while the inner identity, soft, feminine, genuine, felt like the only truth capable of offering peace. But there was no space in the world of 18th century diplomacy to express such authenticity. The consequences of revealing it were unthinkable: ruin, dismissal, danger. And so the truth remained hidden, guarded behind silence and discipline. Still, this truth was no longer a quiet whisper. It had become a steady pulse, guiding the heart even as the mind remained bound by circumstance. As Dion prepared to leave Russia after years of nuanced diplomacy, exceptional service, and profound inner transformation, a new chapter approached, one that would take place far from the Russian court, in a world that had no idea of the revelation waiting ahead. The journey from St. Petersburg would lead toward conflict, honor, controversy, and finally a bold declaration of identity that would echo across centuries. For now, the snow-covered city held its breath as Dion stepped quietly into the next stage of a life that would become one of history's most extraordinary stories. The life of a diplomat, a spy, and a person who dared to live as both man and woman in an age that offered almost no room for such truth.